Welcome everybody. This morning, I'm going to be going through something that's fairly new to SAS today. It's called the SAS Viya platform. What we're going to do is basically go through the software really quick, and I'll try to point out some of the most useful features of the software. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been at SAS going almost 21 and a half years now, and spent my first 17 years or so in consulting, which meant, I got to work with a lot of SAS customers in various backgrounds. Started out in what we call web analytics. 20 years ago, the dot-com boom was going on, and people had a lot of data that they were gathering from their websites and really didn't know how to analyze it. So I started out there, but my background is actually in retail. And so I've worked with some retail customers and service industry, manufacturing, and finished up probably my last 5 years in consulting. I mainly work with banks, building credit models and portfolio models for banks to give them an idea of how healthy they were and prove to the Fed that they were in a good financial position. So then the opportunity came to me to move over to SAS Education, and I jumped at the chance. I tell everybody I have the best job in the world. Before the pandemic, I got to visit universities pretty much on a weekly basis, and teach students and faculty about SAS and statistics and machine learning, all that stuff. So that's what I'll be doing today. But again, if you have questions, please feel free to come over the line. I have a brief slideshow before we're actually getting the software. And I do notice a lot of people are in the meeting that I didn't have registered for the class. That's no problem. I'll put the course notes that we're going to loosely follow in the chat in a little bit, and then show you how to get access to the software. I did want to talk just briefly, and I'll try not to bore you with this, but we are a partner of a company called IMSI that gathers employment job posting data from all around the world, but particularly in the United States. So SAS is a partner with them. So I asked Lori to pull some data just so I could share this about job postings that listed SAS as a skill. So you can see that there are tons of jobs out there. And this is really one of the main reasons we do what we do for free. So everything that we do for universities is free, including software and training and visits to campus, providing course notes and curriculum consulting. But the reason we do that is we want to make sure that the students are exposed to SAS, because we want our SAS customers that pay for our software to have a good job applicant pool to pull from. So, this shows from in the last year, there's been 171,000 jobs that listed SAS as a skill. This is in the US. You can see some of the companies that are the biggest posters. We're really big in healthcare and pharmaceuticals, but also banking. Humana is one of the top employers of SAS for SAS skills. But you also see maybe some other companies that are familiar to you. Also, financial industry, SAS is a desired skill. And some of the titles that we see, of course, we're number one in biostatisticians. So it's because the FDA requires that clinical trials be submitted in SAS. That gives us a big hand, a lot of pharmaceutical companies use SAS because they know that the FDA requires that. But you also see, data scientists and statistical programmers are up there, actuarial sciences and analytics managers, business intelligence. Pretty much anything to do with analytics, you'll likely see SAS listed as a desired skill. And then I had Lori go ahead and pull the job postings just for Kentucky and Tennessee. Probably could have gone, with some other states just to get some regional kind of perspective. And there were 3,750 job postings, and you'll notice that these are unique job postings. Employers will post on multiple sites, so MZ does a great job at kind of filtering those out and saying, there were 17,000 total job postings, but they said a lot of these were for the same job. So in the Kentucky, Tennessee area, there are around 3,700 job postings that listed SAS as a skill. And here are some of the top companies just in the Kentucky, Tennessee area. Again, Humana and Anthem, the healthcare providers. Some of these companies, maybe you guys are familiar with, not really sure. Familiar with them myself. And again, the job titles that are most showing up with SAS skills. And again, biostatistician comes to the top, but data analytics and reporting are right there too. The top cities, of course, Nashville being the fastest growing city, I think, in the United States right now. But you also see Louisville, Memphis, Brentwood, Lexington, Frankfurt. I would imagine there's some big companies there. I know in Lexington, there is like 3 big companies. I think FedEx is there. They're a big SAS customer. Humana, of course, and then there's a local hospital, or the hospital that's associated with the university there are big SAS employers. All right, so course setup. Well, if you would have registered for this class, you would have got something that an email that said, go to your class, and it would have a page which it would have your link to SAS Viya, your link to the course notes, and of course your link here. Now, some of you may be joining directly from the link that Lily provided, but there's no worries, right? This course is easy enough. I can post the course notes in the chat window, and I'll do that in just a second. But the real thing is we want to make sure you have access to the software. So this is kind of what this is for a different class, but you would get if you go back and go ahead and register for that class, you'll get a link to the software. There's a link to the live classroom. And then if you scroll down, there would be actually the course notes. But again, no worries if you haven't done that. We'll make sure we cover that during the class time today. So the real the real key is to make sure that you get your hands on the software today. This is meant to be an interactive class where you kind of follow along with what I'm doing on the screen, so you get used to SAS Viya and actually get your hands on the software so that you know how to get your the data that you're working with into the software, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I'm going to take a pause and just make sure that everybody has access to Viya for Learners. So the easiest way, and I'm going to just bring up a web browser here. The easiest way to get access to the software is if you go to Google and you just type in Viya for Learners. and I'll post this link, but just click on the Viya for Learners, and this is where you apply for access. Now, Viya for Learners is a platform. I'll go ahead and post this in the chat window. So if you want to kind of go to that link, if you have access to the chat window, you can go there. And this is a free platform. We'll talk about the Viya software. We actually have two free platforms for students and faculty. We're going to be talking about the Viya platform, which is SAS latest platform today, but towards the end, I'll show you another platform that is available to students and faculty, actually to anybody, with the kind of classic SAS 9.4 software. But you would tell your students to go to this page. They would get access for students and access for educators. So there's really no difference here, but you would click on the access for educators. And as long as you're registering, so it'll take you to a screen. I'm already registered, but it'll take you to a screen where you have to enter your SAS profile if you have it. Now, as long as you have a EDU, your profile is associated with an EDU email address, you'll get automatic access to this environment. So it does take a little while to set up that SAS profile if you haven't, but you should probably, if you're going to be teaching or introducing your students to SAS Viya, probably should get them to do that ahead of time and make sure that they do have access to the Viya software. So once you set up your profile, it'll take you to a sign-on screen, something like this. And this will take you to this Viya for Learners screen. And so what we have right now to launch the software, this is a good page to bookmark. So once you do that registration process, you can just bookmark this page, and just every time you want to launch the software, it's completely cloud-based, so there's nothing to download. Works best with Chrome browser. Really, the only browser that I've had a problem with is the Safari browser. For some reason, on Apple, for some reason, there are some glitches with that browser. But every other browser that I've tested with works fine. So you would come here and actually launch the software. We're going to do that at the start of class, but I just want to show you, we do have tons of data out there on Viya for Learners, and this is not complete, but we've started a data repository where it talks about all the data sets that are out there, or all the tables that are out there and are available in SAS Viya. Let's jump back to the PowerPoint just to make sure. So hopefully you guys are able to, while I'm still talking, getting access to SAS Viya. And again, make sure you use your .edu email address when you're registering, and you should get automatic access. So that's really the big setup. I'm gonna post another. I'm go ahead and post the course notes for this class into the chat also, and that's really all you need. So that should be out there now. Let me know if you didn't get that. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to follow the course notes exactly. I'm going to try to show you some of the cool things that you can do in SAS Viya, but we'll kind of loosely. We'll definitely work with the same data that the course uses, and there is a data dictionary portion in that. So, any questions before we get started? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. So what is SAS Viya? So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but first we'll kind of do just some brief slides, introduction to what we call the analytics lifecycle, and then we'll review some of the Viya creates the complete process, and and then illustrate some of the functionality. So the analytics lifecycle, you probably heard this before. I mean, 80% of the work that's done in data analytics is usually done in this first phase. You know, getting your data, getting it ready to, I would say, these first two phases. So data and discovery, actually acquiring your data, getting it into the software, getting it ready for analytics. All of that is in the data and discovery. And then once you have a model that you would like to work with, actually deploying that model can be a significant challenge. So the idea is our SAS Viya environment includes tools, all the SAS tools in one interface where you can go through the entire life cycle, from getting your data into the software to running reports about the data, maybe making changes to that data for analytics, building your model, and then also deploying your model. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time in the deployment phase. Most of this class is talking about the data and discovery, which includes the modeling portion. And we'll kind of concentrate on statistical modeling or machine learning modeling today. So once you get into SAS Viya, the first place you land is the SAS Drive. And this will show you all the reports that you have available to you. Either you've created them or somebody has made those reports available to you in SAS Viya. But you can see all the different applications. So previous to SAS Viya, we had what we called data prep studio or data studio. We had model studio. We had something called visual analytics and visual statistics. And then we had something called model manager for deploying the model. And then of course we have tools for programming. What SAS Viya did was take all of those tools, those separate tools from SAS, and put them all into one cloud platform where you can access those tools without ever having to leave the interface. So that's one of the main, the key things that SAS Viya does is it brings all the tools from SAS that are needed for that analytics lifecycle into one interface where you never have to leave that interface, whether you're preparing data or building models or deploying models. So this is a big, for our commercial customers, this is a big deal because they might have to connect to an exterior database, grab their data, do some data manipulation. Now they can do everything from start to finish inside of Viya. But SAS Drive is kind of like Google Drive. This is a place where you can see all the applications and all the reports and models and all the objects that you built in SAS Viya in one place. We're going to spend most of our time in the build models. Again, this is kind of meant to be a little bit of a machine learning algorithm workshop, but just know that those other applications are out there and available in SAS Viya. So in Model Studio or the build models, we have three different types of models that we can work with. We're going to be working in the visual data mining and machine learning, but we also have forecasting and text analytics available in this Model Studio or build models interface. So if you're working with text data, again, you can do that in SAS Viya. You don't have to open up a new tool from SAS. It's all available here. The same the same with forecasting. Again, we're going to focus on statistical model building, visualizing our data, and then using some of the machine learning models in SAS Viya. Okay, so hopefully everybody has access to the software. I think the first time that you register, you may get an email saying, hey, you now have access. A lot of times at universities, that may go to your spam folder or your junk folder. But if you could, I'll post this link into the window. So sometimes you actually get access without knowing it because the email gets routed to your spam. But hopefully everybody can get to that page that I just put in the chat window, and we're actually going to launch the SAS software. So click on SAS Viya 3.5. I will let you know while this is loading that there is a version, a later version that we're still testing in Viya for Learners. So there's some new enhances, not a big deal as far as the interface, just new features that will become available later in the year. And then you'll see SAS Viya 4.0 on your screen. So if you're able to get into the software, I do want to explain a little bit about SAS Viya before we get started, the environment. So I talked about, we've taken all the tools for that SAS had, separate tools, and loaded those into this, this cloud environment. The other thing that's important about SAS Viya, and particularly in Viya for Learners, is we actually have about 60 SAS Viya environments for Viya for Learners. So this is the way we can allow a lot of people to come on to the free Viya for Learners environment without any one user bogging the system down. So there's actually about 60 separate, and it may be even more than that now, environments. And so if you look up at your URL, you'll see this V4E and then some numbers. So I know that I'm on what's environment, or we call them tenants, tenant 35. Now, you may be on a different, probably are on a different tenant than I am. And the only thing that means is we can't share information back and forth, right? You're in a completely different SAS Viya environment than I am. And the reason we have to do that, we have about 30,000 people that are on SAS Viya for Learners. If we stuck them all onto one SAS Viya environment, 30,000 people being on the environment at the same time would quickly bog down the environment. So again, you'll be kind of randomly, as you sign up for SAS Viya, you'll be kind of randomly stuck into one of these 60 tenants identified by this number here. But don't worry, once you get assigned to a tenant and your students get assigned to the tenant, they'll stay on that same tenant or environment the whole time. So if they create a report and save that report, it'll be available. They won't get shuffled over to another tenant, which won't have access to their particular reports. So here we're on the SAS Drive, and you can see I've got a lot of reports here that I've done. I teach a lot with this environment, and it works great. But I tend to save everything with my initials. So you'll see a lot of TG reports here that you probably will not see unless you're on tenant 35 for some reason. So these are save reports that I can go back to and open up and edit. We call this this icon at the top the hamburger menu. It kind of looks like a hamburger here. And if I click on this, this is how I get to all of those other tools within SAS. So for example, we're going to start out in the Explore and Visualize. this is what SAS called previously visual analytics and visual statistics. And then we're going to move over to build models. This is the model studio that we talked about, where we can build statistical machine learning models, but we could also do forecasting or text analytics. These other applications we may touch on, for example, if I'm a SAS programmer and I just want to bring up an interface and start programming in SAS, I can do that by going to develop SAS code. This will take me to SAS Studio, which is our web-based interface to access SAS. And so if you want to still program in SAS, you can do that here. You just click on the develop SAS code. It'll bring you to SAS Studio. You can program away. Some of the other things that about SAS Viya, one of the main, so we talked about we've been able to bring in all the SAS tools that facilitate the analytics lifecycle. But the other thing with SAS Viya is it's actually each SAS Viya environment is actually a collection of 40 different servers. And so not only can we bring all the tools together in SAS Viya, but we can also take really huge data sets and we actually stripe those across those 40 different servers. So why is that important? Not really important for the end user, maybe somebody building models. But if you think about that architecture, what SAS has done is saying, okay, we can bring in huge data sets, but we can also run those models against those huge data sets because all the algorithms that we're going to use have been parallelized. So let's say you have a data set that has 40 million observations. Of course, you could run that in classic SAS. You may have to go to lunch. Let's say you're building a logistic regression model. If it has 40 million observations, you may submit that logistic regression model and you may have to go get coffee and come back if you're, maybe even have to get lunch and then come back before you get the results. The idea with SAS is I could submit that model and get answers back in a couple of seconds. And that's because the architecture behind the scene, all the algorithms have been able to take advantage of the data split across 40 different servers, operate on that data independently, and then bring back the results very quickly. And so the data set that we're going to be working with today is not huge. It's 1.1 million observations, but we'll see, hopefully, our internet will be, as long as you have a good internet connection, we'll be able to run some very sophisticated machine learning models against that data and get answers in seconds instead of minutes or even hours in some cases. So why is this important? Well, it's important for one thing because data is actually growing, so we're working with much bigger data sets. And for the most part, maybe not so much in the clinical trials area. It's still, a relatively small data. But in retail and banking, cybersecurity, we're dealing with huge amounts of data coming in, millions of observations every day, and we accumulate that and want to operate on that and make the best decisions based on the latest data. So having this architecture where we can actually run models on large amounts of data is important. The other thing is these machine learning algorithms, of course, are, for the most part, iterative algorithms, right? We'll talk about a couple today that actually build on each other, right? So they may take one pass through the data, get a result, and then say, well, that result is not as good as I want. Can I improve that? So I might, for example, I might want to run a decision tree, right? But I might want to run that decision tree 100 times or 150 times, and hopefully each time make some improvements. Well, in a classic sense where we have to serially process the data, that could take a very long time. But with SAS Viya, with that architecture, we can run those iterative machine learning algorithms very quickly and get results back. So that's the second reason for SAS Viya and the architecture behind it. Any questions there before we actually bring up our data? We're good. I don't see any questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out in the SAS Visual Analytics and Visual Statistics. So we're going to go to this Explore and Visualize, right? And this is actually going to take us to SAS Visual Analytics, Visual Statistics. So there's a couple ways we could start out. We could just start out just building a new report, right? Or we could first pick our data and then say, okay, I know the data set I want to work with. Let me start with bringing in the data, and then I'll start to explore that data. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to build a report about that data. I do want to show you one thing that's not in the notes. We do have some settings for visual analytics, and each time you go into a new application from the hamburger menu, you can set up the kind of the global settings for that application. So I'm going to go up to the top here. This is actually a picture. You can't really see it here, but these are my settings personally that will be attached to me associated with Explore and Visualize application. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to go to settings. And so you get some global settings that apply to all the applications. You can pick a theme, you can upload your profile picture, select your region and language, and then any accessibilities. Some of these are actually useful here, but I'm just going to leave the defaults for those. And then you'll see the visual SAS Visual Analytics. So these are the settings that I can set for the visual analytics or that Explore and Visualize. So a couple of things here. I'm going to leave the default settings. You can talk about, there actually is a link to Esri. I haven't played around with this enough to know what all you get by checking this box. But you just have to agree to Esri's ArcGIS conditions. I'm going to leave that unchecked because we're not going to use any of the geographical features of the software. And then network analysis, you basically give it an ID for the node. So there is network analysis here. If you're doing supply chain or supply optimization things, you can do that here. We're going to actually concentrate on the visual analytics. And a couple of things that I have checked here is to sort the categorical response in descending order. This will make sure that if I'm modeling a categorical response variable, that I always pick the highest level to be my event level. And then the second one is if I run across any variable, any input variable that only has two levels, even though that may be coded with numbers like 0, 1 or 1 and 2, I want to automatically convert that to a categorical variable. So those are a couple of things. You can also set your default fit statistic that you want to evaluate the models. So by default, the KS statistic is selected for categorical response variables and the average squared error is selected. But you could set these to observed average for measure or sum of squares error. And then there's a bunch of selections for categorical variables. But again, we can look, it's not that these fit statistics will not be available. It's just, here's the one that we're saying, we're gonna select the best model based on this fit statistic. So I'm gonna leave that. Really, the only thing I changed here is I checked this box. And because I checked this box, our results will look a little bit different than what's in the course notes, if you're following along there. Then I'll click close. Now, I know the data set that I want to work with. This is actually a marketing data set. So this is a fictitious bank. And what the regulators do every year is, depending on the size of the bank, there's something called CCARs, or for small and mid-sized banks, there's a regulation called DFAST. And what they do is every year, the bank has to run these DFAST models or CCARs models and prove to the federal regulators in the US that they are capable of withstanding a financial crisis, like we experienced in 2007, 2008 timeframe, when these regulations were enacted. These basically tell the Federal Reserve, hey, this bank is in a good position, even if there is a downturn in the economy, these banks will still survive, and they have enough cash reserves and assets to cover any losses that they might experience. Well, our fictitious bank actually got a great report from the federal regulators, and the regulator said you can offer more credit. So the bank makes money by lending money to me and you, and then they collect interest. That's one of the main ways retail banks make money. So this was great news for the bank. They said, well, instead of going out and just randomly marketing new credit offers to our existing 55 million customers, we're going to randomly select 1.1 million customers and send out credit offers, new car loans, new home equity lines, new credit cards, anything we can do to open up new credit lines with our existing customers instead of trying to spend money on bringing new customers. So they did this for about 6 months. So they jam people's mailboxes with offers and emails and that sort of thing, and try to get these existing customers to open up new credit lines. And then they measured over that 6-month period how many people opened up new accounts, how many new accounts did they open, and what was the dollar value. So that kind of tells you about the data that we're working with. And what they want to do now is, of course, build a model to say, all right, we've got 55 million customers. Which customers should we market to that are likely to open up a new account? So I'm going to click the Start with Data. And this is going to give me a list of all the available data sets that are available in SAS Viya. So this data is preloaded into the environment. One of the questions we get a lot from educators is, well, can I upload my own data? And currently the answer is, frankly, no. But there are ways to get data up into SAS Viya so that it will be available. And we can talk a little bit about that at the end. And then I have a proposal for Lily. We're actually piloting the upload feature now in SAS Viya. And so if the conditions are right, then we'll let people upload their own data. but then that data will just be available to whoever uploads it. It kind of goes in their via user directory. But we have tons of data out there. We'll talk about the data that we're going to use, but you'll see in the available tab, this data has not only been loaded to the environment, it's been loaded to memory. So you'll see these little tables with the like a lightning bolt. So the other thing that makes SAS Viya really quick is we don't have to go back to disk. So that data is stored across 40 different servers, but it's also pushed up into memory, which makes our analytics run faster. So all the data that you see here available is actually loaded to SAS Viya and then also pushed into memory. The other tab that we have here is the data sources, and we can expand this. Basically, these folders are course codes, and so these are for each course that we teach in SAS Viya. These are the data sets associated with that course. And if I expand it here, there may be some situations where you see a table and it's not yet pushed into memory. Like this one, you'll see it doesn't have a little lightning bolt. Actually, it is pushed into memory. But if you come across a table under the data sources tab that you don't see an InMemory table, all you have to do to load it to memory is click the little lightning bolt here. So this little lightning bolt will load that into memory if you don't see it. So I'm going to go back. I think the data set that we're working with has been loaded to memory. So I'm going to go back to the available tab, and the data set is called VS Bank. It's actually called VS Bank Part. So if I go to the search bar here and just type in VS Bank, the data set that we want is called VS Bank Part. And the reason it has that part suffix is it has a partition variable inside of it. So I'm gonna click on that, VS Bank Part. It'll go out to, again, to memory, pull in that data and give me some quick information about that data. So it went out there, basically pulled the metadata about this data. So it gives me a list of all the variables that are available in this data. You can see I've got roughly 1.1 million rows and 56 variables or columns. I could look at some sample data if I wanted to. I could go to the profile. And if the profile, this will give me some basic statistics about each variable. And if you're in a particular tenant where the profile actually hasn't been run, then you can run that profile. I'm gonna turn off my video here just to make things run a little bit faster. I think my internet is having a little bit of trouble. So hopefully that'll make things go faster. So on the profile tab, again, if you don't get this report coming up, you can always click the run profile. This will go out and compute some statistics about all the variables in your data set. And you can see, you get things like the mean, the median, the mode, standard deviation, standard error, that sort of thing. So if you're new to a data set, if you're not familiar with it, this is a great way to kind of get familiar with it. For example, account ID, the account number, I would expect this to be 100% unique. And if I see something like this, maybe it was only 80% unique, that may tell me that I have to go back and maybe dedupe my data to make sure that I'm dealing with only one account at a time. Then we've got some demographic variables. We'll talk more about this data, but I work with this data a lot. I know this is what I want, so I'm just going to click the OK button down here. And this is going to start my visual analytics, visual statistics report. You'll see in here that if you did go over and click those settings, you may see some demographic variables because they're actually coded as zeros and ones. So they originally were considered measurement variables or numeric variables, but because I selected that box, if that variable only has 2 levels, then it's going to automatically make it a category variable and not a measurement variable, no matter what the values are. So SAS quickly goes through here and says, okay, I've got basically 2 types of data in this data set. I've got category variables or character variables and measurement or numeric variables. So the first part of my data or analytics lifecycle would be exploring the data. So I might want to go through here and, for example, look at a variable like customer age. So the way SAS Viya works is I can just grab a variable, drag it onto the canvas, the center part, and it's going to decide based on the level of that variable and the values, what type of variable, what is the best way to display that variable. So in this case, I grabbed a measurement variable, demographic age, and it told me that a histogram was the best way to display this variable. So again, this was not pre-canned. SAS didn't have this report or this graph waiting in the wings. With 1.1 million observations, I was able to quickly go through and take a look at this variable. Now, I remember when I first, probably about 4 years ago, when we first started getting introduced to SAS Viya, I thought, oh my gosh, I felt like a pilot sitting down in a plane and somebody told me that I had to fly somewhere because there's just so many icons on this interface. So I'm going to kind of use that pilot analogy to kind of explain at least how I keep things straight in my head about what icons do. So the icons up here, we've already used one. These kind of control my global settings or my global view and settings for each application. So up here at the top, you can go to search and get some help, or I can go here like we've seen, and I can set some settings for SAS Visual Analytics. Over on the left-hand side of the screen, these icons, of course, we've talked about the hamburger menu. This is where I can go from one application to the other. But over on this left-hand side, these are my high-level controls. So here's where if I wanted to change data sets, I could do that. I could click on the data and then select a different data set. I could also select the objects that I want to appear in my report. So I just dragged a variable on and SAS decided what object it wanted. But for example, if I knew I wanted to do a pie chart, I could drag that pie chart over to my canvas and then assign based on the data I have selected, assign the roles to my pie chart. So this is where, again, data might, in the pilot analogy, might be, okay, what plane am I getting in? The objects are, what city am I going to? And then we have some of the other icons over here that give us an outline, maybe make some suggestions based on the data that we're working with. So that's all the high level controls for this report that we're working with. And then on the right-hand side, we have all the low-level controls. So once we pick the data and the object that we want to work with, this is how we control how this object appears. So again, if I didn't want to look at customer age anymore, I could click here and pick another variable for this histogram. Maybe I want to look at demographic income. So I could change the way this object looks by either reassigning the roles here or going to the options tab and adding some changes to this object. For example, I could change the direction of the histogram. I could specify a height, give it titles, change the coloring. So these are all the fine-tuning controls for my objects. I could add in action, so we won't get into this. I could add buttons up here that control a slider bar or something like that. I could add filters here, so if I didn't want to look at the entire amount of data, I could add a filter to maybe only look at, I don't know, female customers or male customers. I could control that. And you'll notice here, we basically we're creating a report and we can add pages to the report. So let's go back up to our data and take a look at some of the other information about this data. So I might want to look at how many of my customers own their own home. So I could drag this binary variable homeowner over to the canvas and notice how a different portion of the canvas, as I drag this variable around, different portions of the canvas turn blue. And so that's going to allow me to add multiple objects on the same page if I want to. So if I drop this here, now I'm going to get a report for binary homeowner. So I could see roughly 583,000 of my current customers that are in my sample own their own home, and then 476,000 do not own their own home. So I can continue to add objects to this current page. I can change the page name, which is always a good idea as we start getting longer and longer reports. I can just double click or use these little, we call these snowman icons. You'll see these pop up all over the place. And these are particular to each of the objects. For example, this snowman would control the bar graph here. I get another snowman pops up here. This controls the histogram. This controls the data that I'm working with. This snowman would control the whole report. So for example, if I'm ready to save this report, I could click on this snowman and actually save it in a directory. I can also add pages here by just clicking the plus button. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this data before we actually get into the model building. So the main variables that are driving this what I hope to drive this model are a couple of things. So there's two category variables, and the first one has 3 levels. We can see it has 3 levels. Let's go ahead and drag this one over and take a look at it. So again, this is a categorical variable. So by default, SAS is going to produce a bar graph. This variable has 3 different levels, X, Y, and Z. X stands for the most active customers. So in my 1.1 million sample, these X customers are what we consider very active customers. The Y customers are medium active, and then the Z customers are what we would consider non-active customers. They haven't opened up an account with us. They haven't transacted at the bank for a while. So in our sample, most of our customers are the active customers. The second category we have here, and let's go ahead and drag this one over. Maybe we'll drag this one to the bottom. This has 5 different levels, and this is a measure of lifetime value. So at the start of our experiment or of our marketing campaign, the people at the bank have come up with a formula that takes a look at each customer and kind of comes up with a lifetime value of the customers. And this has levels A, B, C, D, and E. A are our most valuable customers. So these are the customers with the most accounts. We're making the most money off these customers. E are our least valuable customers. I say valuable, the customers that are making the least amount of money. And probably this makes sense that E would be the largest group. These are probably customers with just like a checking account or a savings account. We don't make a whole lot of money if people just have deposit accounts. There is a little bit of overnight trading we can do to make money on how much money they have at the bank. But if they don't have a loan with us, we're really not making a whole lot of money. And you can see most of our customers fall in this E category. So between A and E, we have various levels of lifetime value. So we're going to hopefully use these 2 variables. Now, I will tell you about the demographic variables. They might look promising, but these are variables that we actually purchased from an outside company for this fictitious bank. And they are not the actual account holders, for example, income. These are based on averages, based on the customer's address. So home value is in the customer's zip code. What's the average home value? So because these variables are not particularly directly related to the customer, I'm going to not use them. And then we'll scroll down, we'll see all these different versions of RFM variables. RFM was, the term is coined by a guy named David Shepard way back in the late 80s, early 90s, I think. And it stands for recency, frequency, and monetary. And this is basically the customer's history. Prior to launching this marketing campaign to this 1.1 million customers, we took a look at their customer history. For example, we took a look at RFM 12 is the customer's tenure. So how long have they been a customer? How many accounts have they opened in their lifetime with the bank? And how many new accounts have they had in the last 3 years? How many times have we promoted to them in the last 3 years over their lifetime? So this kind of gives us there are 12 of these RFM variables, and this kind of gives us a history of the customer. So I think these variables are probably a good indication of who's going to open a new account. You'll also see some different versions of these. So some of these variables maybe have missing values. So prior to loading this data, we imputed any missing values with the means. And then also most of these variables are skewed to the right because they are count variables or either dollar variables. So what the person who created this data actually did is they first imputed any missing values, and then they took the log transform. So the variables that we're actually going to be working with are the log imputed values of the original variables. So let's add a new page. And then we're going to grab all these log I variables. The first one, they are log RFM1 down to log RFM9. And you'll see 10 and 11 and 12 are included there. Well, what would happen if I drag all 12 of these variables over? So I'm just going to do that and see what SAS does. All right. So SASTA said, hey, you drag 12 measurement variables. what kind of graph would make sense with these. So it gave me a correlation matrix or graph here. So I could hover over this and say, these 12 variables are correlated with each other. So for example, if I hover over this dark square, I could see that log I, RFM 10 and 11 have a correlation of 0.7085. So if I'm building a model that like a logistic regression model or a regression model, I probably don't want to include both of these variables in that model because then I'll get something called multicollinearity. It may alter the parameter estimates, cause all kinds of problems with my regression model. So I could look at some of these variables, average, hover over this one, average sales in the past 3 years is highly correlated, strong correlation with average sales lifetime, kind of expected. But what I wanted to illustrate with this is SAS Viya didn't know I was going to drag those 12 variables over and ask for correlations. That might take a long time to do if I wasn't in the SAS Viya environment, but you can see it came back pretty fast. It created this graph, computed the correlations, and pretty significant amount of sufficiently small amount of time. Well, what about the target variables? So let's take a look at the target variables. If I scroll all the way down, I see we have 3 target variables. There's a target binary new product. So this variable is telling us whether someone opened a new account or not. Doesn't tell us how many accounts they opened. It just says in my 6-month marketing time frame, did the customer open a new account, at least one new account. Now the target count number of new products, this is the number of new accounts they opened up, and the last one is the dollar value of the accounts that credit accounts that customers opened up in that 6-month time frame. Well, this target binary is actually coded as a 0, 1. And this is the variable that we're going to model for this class. But before we do that, we want to change this variable because it was marked as a target variable and it was coded as numbers. SAS has this as a measurement variable. And I want to treat it as a categorical variable. So there's a couple of ways I can change this. I can right click on it and just say convert to category, or I can use these down arrows here and take a look at the metadata about this variable, and I can see the variable name, the type of variable it is, and then also some how it is stored as far as the format, and if I included this variable in any kind of a report, what the default aggregation would be. So I'm going to click on the classification and I'm going to change this to category. Now that variable disappears from the measurement list, and if I scroll up, now it shows up into the target binary new product. So let's take a look at that one. I'm going to drag that over to the canvas just to get an idea of, in my 1.1 million sample, roughly I have 848,000 that, even though I stuffed their mailboxes with credit offers and sent them emails, maybe did phone calls to them, they still didn't open up a new account. We see the target binary value is 0. But 211,509 of my existing customers did open up a new account. So these are the customers that we want to try to build a model to help predict. If I wanted to know the percentage, you can see the default measurement in my bar graph is frequency, but I could click on that and change that to percentage, any other measurement variable, or I'm going to change it to frequency percent. So in our sample, we got roughly 80% non-responders and 20% responders. So that's a decent amount. I think I should be able to build a statistical model from that. If I wanted to, I could look at some of the other target variables. I could drag them on just to see how they look. The target, whoops. Well, that brings up a good point. Let me delete this out of here. Make sure I clicked on the variable before I tried to drag it on. So here's my target count. And I could see, the largest bar, of course, is 80% of my customers did not open any new accounts. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Some people even open 6 new accounts. Well, this variable is actually numeric, right? It has values from 0 to 6. But suppose I wanted to, for some reason, treat this as a categorical variable instead of a numeric variable. So I told you I could use these down arrows here and change the metadata about this variable. So right now it's considered a numeric or measurement variable. Let's suppose I wanted to change it to a category variable, just like I did with the target binary. This is one of the kind of where people get frustrated. They said target count cannot be changed to a category because it's been assigned to an object in the report. So once you use a variable in the model, you cannot change the metadata about this. So I can't change this unless I go through and delete this object that's using that variable. Now I can change it to category. And now it'll treat that variable as a category. So I get that nice bar chart. Let's take a look at the other one, which is the target new sales. I'll drag that one, try to get it to go to the bottom there. And again, you can see most of even for the people that open new accounts, they're relatively small loans. The biggest peak is between $9,000 and $15,000. But we do have people that open very large, 400,000, 200,000. Maybe these are new mortgages or something like that. So we do have some very large loans also. Now, suppose, which often happens, that I wanted to create a variable that I don't see here. For example, I might want to say, well, let me take this customer tenure variable and maybe create a new variable from that. So maybe take RFM2 and divide by RFM12. That'll give me kind of an average. This tenure is actually in months. So this number of months customer, maybe I want to see the average sales divided by the customer tenure, right? So I can do that by clicking on the create new item. And here I'm going to create a calculated item. So I can go to the operators here, and this will just be a simple one. I just want to take two variables, divide one by the other. So I can drag this over. And then for each one, I can go back to my data items. And I could find that log our average sale lifetime, drag that to the numerator, and then customer tenure, drag it to the denominator. So the reason I did this, and then I could give it a name, I might want to say. average sales per month. Something like that. The reason I wanted to do this is, remember I said the data has actually already been loaded into memory. So the changes that we're making in the data is we're not actually changing any of the data. Here, I'm not actually creating a new column in the data. I'm just creating a metadata rule for me. So when somebody else brings up this VS Bank data, they're not going to see my new variable. They're not going to see the binary target change to a category variable or the binary count change to a character variable. I'm just changing my view of the metadata here. So it's kind of an important point that this data, because it's already loaded in memory, I cannot change anything about the data, but I can make these metadata changes that will change my view of the data and how I build my models. So that's just an important thing to keep in. You may create this variable, and then the next time you go in and bring up the VS Bank part data, this variable is not there. And you say, well, what happened to my variable? I know I created it. You didn't actually create the physical copy of the variable. You're just creating this metadata rule that you can use like a variable. So now if we scroll down, let's see, what did I call it? Average sales per month. We could add a new page here and drag that variable over, see what it looks like. And of course, if we were, building this model, we would want to take a look at all of our input variables. We're not going to do that in this class just because of time, but you can see no programming required. This is a drag and drop application, this SAS Visual Analytics, and I can go from exploring my data, creating new data items, maybe taking transformations, that sort of thing. I can get my data ready for modeling all in this application. Okay, at this time, I think I hit it pretty good. I think we're going to stop and take a break here.